You mentioned the CIA previously. Who do you think has currently the most information on UFOs?
That's a good question. I don't know, and I'm not sure anybody does. We do know how these secret government programs work. They are highly compartmentalized so that you have a handful of people working on one aspect of the problem, and that's all that they get to see. And then another aspect of the problem is being handled by another handful of people, and they don't communicate with each other. Who they communicate to, it's not known. Um, and I'm and we also know that, from my experience as a scientist, that you don't get very far working in groups of 3 or 4 people on a single problem. It's really a community of scientists that make progress, and that's what's been not happening for 80 years. So I suspect we really don't know much about UFOs, and that's really the fault of the military and the U.S. military keeping this stuff secret, and other countries keeping it secret. Um, and if they ever fret about the fact that they don't know what they need to know, well, then they need to get their act together and get scientists involved around the world, working together, trying to figure this out openly. And that's the way you solve problems. If this is really an important problem, let's do that. Let's get to work and do that. So now at this point, some scientists are involved. I'm involved with UAPX, and I have affiliations with several other organizations, and we have other organizations around the world, the Galileo Project, SUAPS, the SCU, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. You have the Sol Foundation. You have IFEX in Germany. You have VASCO in Sweden. And we're all in communication with each other, trying to figure this out ourselves. There is no funding, no federal funding in the US for this yet. And if they want scientists to actually study it, that would be a wise thing to do. But some of us are now working on it, and we're working together globally to try to get to the bottom of it. But I really think that our governments, and I'll use plural because there are multiple countries involved, really don't know very much about these things. A lot of the because it's kept secret. A lot of the leaders aren't aware of how serious the topic is. Again, using the word serious, it implies threat, right? Which we're back to that again, which is a constant problem. It's not clear there's a threat, but it's clear that we have somebody else we share this planet with that we don't know anything about. It would be smart for us to know,
Yeah.
at the very least.
Are you in favor for full disclosure, or would you rather argue for more cautious and controlled release of information?
Disclosure is going to be a mess. When it really happens, it's going to be a mess. So far, you've seen some. We're in the disclosure process now. We've had disclosures, and people who have been paying attention realize that, oh, this is a real situation, and they have come to terms with it to some degree. I think most of the world hasn't been paying attention. Nobody has the bandwidth for this anymore, and there's too much other serious things happening in the world. And so this very abstract thing that we've been told our whole lives is nonsense turns out to be true. That's going to be hard for people to get their heads around. And I think there's an excellent talk by Chris Mellon, the Soul Foundation meeting from last year, from November 2023. And you can find that on YouTube. And he talks about the situation. And he, at one point, likened it to COVID. And what went wrong with COVID was that a lot of little aspects of society faltered. Right, several things happened in our society that didn't work, and they had all happened at once, and we couldn't easily recover from that. And that's what made COVID really difficult. And that's going to be the same thing for this type of disclosure. It's going to hit the stock market because people are going to panic. It's going to hit churches and religion, because there's going to be some panic and concern there. It's going to hit schools in some degree. How do schools handle this? And so, these are just a few off the top of my head, but people have looked at this more carefully and can give you more details. But I think disclosure will be a miss. Should you not do it? No, we have to do it. I mean, people should know what the situation is. And that's especially true if it turns out that the abduction phenomenon is real. And that's, again, another phenomenon that's related to UFOs. Even UFO people don't like to talk about the abduction phenomenon because it's that taboo. But if it turns out that that's a real phenomenon and really happens, at some point we need to worry about that. What's going on here? That means people are being taken by somebody and having experiments done on them. Should that not be a matter of concern for our governments? I would think so. Should people know that it happens? I would think so. How much do you want people to know? Right away? Maybe not a whole lot right away. So I think it's going to take some time to let disclosure happen. And,
Yeah.
conveniently, since the 1940s, we've had a growth of science fiction that I think has warmed people up to the idea of others, especially in the extraterrestrial sense. Am I suggesting that was planned? No, I think it happened. I think it's convenient for us because I think it will make disclosure a bit easier than it would have been in 1947 or in the 1940s when you had Foo Fighters. I think disclosure then would have been a nightmare. So I think we're in a better position to have disclosure now. People are so used to science fiction being real in some sense that when I teach an astronomy class, I had on one of my final exams, I just had what bodies in the solar system have people set foot on. That was one of my softball questions on a final exam in an astronomy class, and the answer is Earth and Moon. But I've had people put down Tatooine, so they don't really know that Luke Skywalker's homeworld is not a real place. I mean, so and I think this is how science fiction has warmed some of us up to this idea, and that's convenient.
Yeah. There
Some care
are,
needs to be. I think that there is care being taken. At some point, we need to see real evidence. As a scientist, I want to see real evidence. It is, I believe what that David Grusch is telling the truth when he talks about crash craft and bodies. I've heard this from numerous people, and as have others. But we need evidence. I'm a scientist. I want to see evidence. We need evidence of this.
you would like to see evidence, but given the enormous consequences of undeniable evidence, can you understand why you, up until this point, had not have access to this kind of evidence?
I can understand to some degree, but our leaders ought to know that this is what the situation is. The president ought to know. Why is the president not able to be informed about this? Who is running the government becomes the question, right? Who's making this decision? If it's not the elected officials making the decision to disclose or not disclose, then this isn't a democracy. And then we have a bigger problem. And that's serious.
Yeah,
And that's true
I
for
think,
many of the other countries involved too. That's true for the UK. It's true for Europe. It's true for South American countries. It's a big problem. We're looking at
yeah.
a real problem here, and it's very concerning.